Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to Politics and the Pulpit here on your hometown station, 98.1 and AM 1220. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, Jerry Cook, back for another opportunity to bring much-needed truth and clarity to the issues of the day. At the bottom of the hour, we'll be joined by Alexander Haberbush with the Lex Rex Institute, and also the lawyer representing John Eastman in particular, and former President Donald J. Trump in general. You won't want to miss our conversation at the bottom of the hour. Okay, yesterday was Super Tuesday, and it was definitely a Super Tuesday for President Trump, and not so super for President Joe Biden. It was also the end of the day for Nikki Haley, who announced this morning that she had suspended her campaign with a brief yet cryptic message without endorsing Trump yet. She'd mentioned things about wanting to unify and hoping that Trump could earn the votes of those who voted for her. But I think it would have gone a long way had Nikki Haley endorsed the president this morning. However, she's had some sharp elbows on the president the last couple of former president the last couple of weeks, so it might have looked a bit hypocritical for her to quickly endorse her today. So I would hope that somewhere down the road, Nikki Haley will endorse former President Trump. If she doesn't, she will continue to hurt her brand, and any chances that she thinks she might have in 2028 is going to dissipate even more. Plus, remember, a few years ago, she was asked if she would run, and she said, "I'm not going to run if Donald Trump is running." Well, she lied there. And then, of course, she took an oath in order to get on that debate stage for the Republican primaries that she would vow and endorse the Republican nominee. So if she lies two different times, and we'll see what happens going forward, hopefully she does indeed endorse the president. Let's talk about raw vote totals, because there were a lot of great things that happened yesterday that a lot of the mainstream media out there, if you will, the legacy media, is really not covering. I really thought that the big coverage this morning would have been the lone state that Nikki Haley won last night, which was the state of Vermont, which she won by about 4 percentage points or so. Frankly, not that much. I think it was 35,000 to 30,000, respectfully. But hey, she won it. One of the bluest states in all of the Union, next to the District of Columbia, and she won both of them. And in reality, quite a telling thing, if you will, when we're talking about Nikki Haley. But the fact is, there were a lot of interesting takeaways last night. And one of those takeaways is the fact that Trump was up in a major way when it came to all of the votes. If you looked at Trump's numbers in 2020 in the primary and compared to the numbers that he got yesterday, we're talking blowout numbers. And then if you compare what Biden got in the primary in 2020 compared to what he got yesterday, we're talking about a lot of low energy. In fact, uncommitted came out on top in a lot of places. Now, not necessarily beating out Biden, but places like Minnesota, North Carolina, Colorado, a lot of disaffected Democrats just were uncommitted. They didn't want anything to do with Biden. I don't know if it's if this portends that they are not going to vote for him in November. Maybe they all will come back home to Biden, much like we think on the Republican side that the Haley voters are going to come home to Trump. But who knows what's going on? Minnesota, almost 20% of the vote there on Biden's side went to uncommitted. Something north of 12% in North Carolina went to uncommitted. Biden lost American Samoa. I mean, how how often do we mention American Samoa during election cycles? Not very much, but Biden lost to a guy named Jason Palmer. I bet you didn't know who that was until yesterday, and now he's all over the news because he ended up besting the incumbent president. What a thing, man. In Massachusetts, no preference under the Democratic ticket took over 60,000 votes. You say, well, Biden still won over 500,000 votes in Massachusetts. Yeah, but that could be the difference in some of these states. So when you look at the raw vote totals from Biden and compare them to President Trump, there's really no comparison. Let's look at a few of these here. In North Carolina, Trump ended up getting 709. And by the way, this is last night's numbers, so this could be over 800,000 at this point. But Trump got over 800,000 votes in North Carolina. Biden didn't come anywhere close to that. In the state of Texas, let's take the state of Texas, where Biden is having a big fight right now over razor wire and illegal immigrants coming across the border with the governor there of Texas. Trump got somewhere just south of 2 million votes. Do you know what Biden got in Texas? Just over 500,000 votes. Oklahoma. Think about the binary choice of Trump and Haley. In Oklahoma, Haley couldn't get above 15%. In Texas, Haley couldn't get above 17%. In Colorado, she had some of her best numbers, 33%. And then if you look at other states, like, for instance, North Carolina, Haley could barely muster 23% of the vote. In Maine, Haley could barely get 27% of the vote. In Massachusetts, Trump bested Haley by over 20 points. In Virginia, which is just north of the District of Columbia, folks, Haley just won that on Sunday. Just 48 hours later, Trump ended up winning Virginia by somewhere close to 30 points. And the writing was on the wall last night when I was looking at Nikki Haley's campaign website, and I noticed that there was no plans for the very next day, no speeches. We're not going to this state, we're not going to this rally. There was nothing. And I thought to myself, she's going to concede this thing and she's going to throw in the towel, and that's exactly what she did this morning. So on a national level, folks, there's far more enthusiasm for former President Trump than there is for Biden. And by the way, don't let the legacy media tell you that both sides are loathing their choices. One side is clearly loathing their choices, and that would be the blue side. The other side, all you have to do is look at the metrics, folks. The other side, the Republican side, is clearly excited about their choice. They may not like everything about President Trump. They may not like everything he says. But let me just say something to you. A lot of these voters are voting for former President Trump because they are essentially living vicariously through him as when it comes to how the media and how the establishment and how the swamp has treated him over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And there is a little bit of stick it to them in their vote, to the legacy media, to the establishment Republicans, and to the Democrats. And yes, there's a little bit of vengeance here. Now, I know the Bible says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. I understand that. And I'm not advocating vengeance for the sake of vengeance. But at the same time, there are some people that are just sick of being called backwoods, being called racist, being called misogynistic, being called xenophobic, and being called any other name in the book just because they happen to vote the way they do. And folks, if these numbers hold up going in to the general election here in just about 8 months, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but I think this could be a modern day electoral win. And let me qualify that. What is a modern day electoral win? I would say something north of 325 to 330 would be a modern day landslide today. The closest we got to that, and it was over that amount, was Barack Obama in 2008. If you remember the numbers when they were coming in, I remember watching the numbers coming in 2008, and I noticed that the numbers for John McCain were just not that good, even in the Deep South, but the numbers for Obama were astronomical. And that's essentially what I'm seeing here, but on a primary level. And I only think that's going to get more enthused as we get closer and closer. And I'm sure that some of these disaffected Democrats are going to come back home to Joe Biden. Don't get me wrong. I do think there will be some challenges. Frankly, there should be no challenge. Biden is such a feckless leader that I would be surprised if he wins any states. But the fact is, California, Oregon, Washington, and the majority of the Northeast is going to just blindly vote blue. Now, on a local level, there are some exciting things that happened here in the state of California. And what's interesting is, we don't, here in California, we don't always get too excited about our elections out here because it takes, days and days and days to count votes. It's ridiculous. Of the 15 states that voted last night, 14 of them were able to count their votes in one evening, except for California. We're still counting. In some of these precincts, there's only 49% reporting. However, President Trump won California outright, over 70% of the vote, and somewhere close to 30 to 40 points ahead of Nikki Haley. Some of the surprises from last night here in California, Adam Schiff, who spent tons of money propping up Steve Garvey, ended up pushing Steve Garvey exactly where he wanted him to be, which was the second place spot. And if there was one positive from last night, even though there were several, is we don't have to listen anymore to the insufferable voice of Katie Porter. She has been retired, and so she'll be gone after today. Barbara Lee, of course, who represents the Oakland area and wanted to basically import Oakland throughout the rest of the state of California, she was soundly defeated last night. She came in fourth. Katie Porter came in third, and she's somewhere north, just south of 14 points now. My friend Eric Early did not do very well last night. That doesn't mean we're not going to hear more from him, but I will say this. We as Californians, as Republicans, as Trump Republicans, as average Republicans, as swampy Republicans, I don't care who you are, we cannot individually let Adam Schiff anywhere close to the U.S. Senate. And we have got to make sure that Steve Garvey hits a home run on November 5th. And folks, we have to do everything we can, because if we are able to put Steve Garvey into that Senate seat on November 5th, that will be a seismic shift across the United States of America in California. That will also give us control of the Senate. There's some other great races that happened here in California, other than President Trump, of course, winning rather soundly. Suzette Valadares here in District 23 ended up taking the top spot here with Kip Mueller, 31% to 34% to 26%. My friend Mike Garcia did a great job. I think he came out at 59% of the vote here in the primary against George Whiteside's and another Democrat named Steve Hill. If you combine George Whiteside's votes with Steve Hill, Mike Garcia is still 20 points ahead. And I only think that with the enthusiasm going into November 5th, all the down ballot tickets are going to be boosted greatly by former President Trump. My friend Lucy Volotsky, who's running in District 27, she ended up getting about 41% of the vote against Stern, who got 41.2% of the vote. And folks, she did really, really well. Check those updated numbers. My friend Raul Ortiz, who is running for the 64th down in La Habra, Whittier, that area, he was one of the men that signed my ordination certificate back in 1998 when I went into the ministry. And he got a good second place showing, and he's going forward into November with a real strong showing. And as I look at these down ballot races, I'm actually surprised as to how well so many people did. The other thing that I'm waiting to see what happens is Prop 1. Now, Gavin Newsom's popularity in California has dipped down to 47%. Now, for President Trump, that would be like a high water mark, right? But for Gavin Newsom, he's been at 51% for, a long time. And I don't know why, but for some reason, the master of lies is able to keep himself up there. But he's down to 47%, which is a low water mark for him. And his Prop 1 that he has been promoting ad nauseum is right now at 50.3 yes to 49.8 no. And there are still some votes out that are still yet to be counted. So it is very possible that we could say no to this thing, which is just more money being flung into absolute nothingness. And so perhaps California is turning a bit of a corner here. My friend Patrick Gibson outright bested Pilar Chavo in the 40th district. And I was very surprised, to be totally honest with you. I knew he was going to come in second because nobody was running against her. And he ended up taking 54 to 46, I believe it was, depending on which numbers you're looking at. And came out ahead. When we come back here on Politics to Pulpit, we'll be joined by Alexander Haberbush with the Lex Rex Institute. We'll be talking about Fannie Willis and the rest of it all here on your hometown station. All right, we're back here live on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. This is your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook, the Bishop of Santa Clarita. We just got through with some election analysis, and we want to continue that with our guest today. He has not been on in a while because he has an excuse. He got married. And so he's been married now for a few months, and we'll ask him a little bit about that in a second. But Alexander Haberbush, who usually would call in the first Wednesday of the month, he is with Lex Rex Institute in Long Beach, California. And so, Alexander, good to have you back.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. I'm glad to be back. Not that, my brief my sabbatical from your show wasn't appreciated as well, but I'm happy to be back with you all now.
And I'm assuming we're still married and happily so?
Of course, yes, very happily so. Thank you, Jerry.
Very good. Well, let me just go ahead and just ask you, what are your insights as you looked at the returns last night across 15 states, and why do you think the legacy media doesn't want to talk too much about American Samoa?
Well, I'm pretty, I'm pleasantly surprised by the returns from last night, especially, my focus has been mostly on my home state of California, where even if you look at state assembly and state senate, Republicans did better than expected. And then, of course, Trump did much better than expected across every state. Effectively, considering that a vote for Nikki Haley is effectively a vote against Trump, the fact that he finished at, 80% in California, I think is pretty telling about the current national temperature.
Yeah, no doubt. And I actually looked at the raw vote totals yesterday compared to California in 2020, and Trump did far better last night, and in fact won every county in California.
It's funny. People seem to forget that they don't like Democrats until the Democrats are in office again, and then once they are, they realize they don't like them.
Yeah.
But
real quickly before we get into the lawfare argument that I really wanted you on for today, but obviously we had some surprises here. We have not had a U.S. Senate candidate that is a Republican for a very long time here in California.
That's right.
But yet, former Dodgers/Padres baseball player Steve Garvey was able to get his way into the top two on both the full term as well as the short term. In fact, bested Adam Schiff in one of those two. And what are your thoughts on that? Because I'll just be honest with you, I was an Eric Early fan. I endorsed Eric Early. But now Garvey's the man, and of course, all hands on deck. We got to make sure that Adam Schiff doesn't get anywhere near close to that U.S. Senate seat.
Well, I'm a fan of Eric Early, too. I think that as far as policy for policy, I think he was the better of the two candidates, but I'll take anybody over Schiff. And, Garvey's not too bad. From what I've seen of him, I agree with most of what he has to say. I think the name recognition definitely helps. We got Arnold in as governor a few years ago on that basic theory. Californians do seem to love our celebrities.
Yeah, we do, and you'll have to forgive me for that because I actually voted for Arnold over Tom McClintock.
Did you really?
I did, and I had some guys in my church that were a little upset that I did that because I basically did it out of name recognition, hoping that Arnold would end up like Ronald Reagan ended up.
Right.
And unfortunately, Arnold did much better in his first term than he did in his second term.
Well, he caved to the public employees unions, which, in California politics, that's the big no-no because they are the power brokers of this state. And if you're not willing to stand up to them, you're not going to get much done.
And I don't know if you heard about this, but news was breaking just a little bit before the radio show. But I guess after Trump won over 17, 18 states in the last month and a half, Mitch McConnell finally decides to endorse President Trump.
I saw that. After condemning him as a dangerous insurrectionist or whatever he called him, he's now endorsing him for president.
Yeah, it's totally amazing. That's such bravery on his part, don't you think?
Now that everybody else has gone that way, that he's willing to do the same thing, you think that's brave of him?
I just think that's amazing. It's such a ridiculous thing. Anyway, well, listen, I've got you on today, and I'm glad to have you on. And I wanted to use a little bit of your brain power. So obviously, they're still trying to get. Well, let me rephrase that. Colorado and Maine yesterday were also really good votes for President Donald J. Trump.
That's
and
true.
Both of those states tried to get him kicked off the ballot.
Which was such an absurd thing from the start. I think every constitutional scholar and constitutional attorney knew this decision was going to be, if not unanimous, then nearly unanimous. The idea that the 14th Amendment's insurrection provision would apply in this instance is just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And what's funny is watching MSNBC and the rest of these guys spin it and actually come back and say, well, we kind of expected the Supreme Court to come back with a 9-0. And
well, that's not what they were saying a week ago.
It's amazing. But the problem is, Alexander, is the American public in general just has a very low attention span, and they're not watching
short memory.
these things. Yeah, low attention span.
Really short memory.
And they forget what these guys have said. And guys like you and me who are, watching this stuff all the time, we remember what these people are saying. So,
right.
Well, let's go ahead and turn to the lawfare argument here. What's going on with the Fani Willis, Nathan Wade debacle in Georgia, and will Fani be thrown off this case?
Obviously, because just full disclosure here, I am working on John Eastman's legal defense team on that case. As such, I can't give all my opinions because some of them are subject to attorney-client privilege. But as far as what I can say, obviously, I do hope that she will get disqualified. Now, we did not file a brief or haven't filed a brief yet for disqualification, but several of the other defendants did. We, of course, agree with those briefs arguing for her disqualification. Whether or not it's going to happen, I will say it's an uphill battle to get a district attorney or a prosecutor disqualified on a case. Typically, obviously, if she and Wade were married, and Willis, by virtue of the fact that they were married, got a stake in a very high hourly rate that Wade is getting paid for prosecuting this case, I think we'd have a different story, especially because Wade was hired both for the indictment phase, so the grand jury phase, and also now for the prosecution phase. You typically divide those two things up, because if you don't do that, what happens is you've created a financial incentive to procure an indictment, because the guy knows, hey, if I get an indictment, I'm going to get several thousand more legal billable hours out of this because I'll be able to prosecute the case, as opposed to if I don't get an indictment, then I'm done and I get a lot less money. And obviously, if Fannie Willis were married to Wade, she would be benefiting directly from that decision. A little bit more ambiguous when they're having an extramarital affair. Now, I don't think that actually makes it any better for them. It just makes the law a lot less clear on this point.
Now, let's say that she doesn't get kicked off this case. How many people are really going to take the verdict on this thing seriously when all of this stinks to high heaven? The average guy that doesn't have a law degree just says, this stuff stinks, and look what they're doing to Trump. Isn't this just going to gin up just more and more support for the guy?
Well, I hope it does. And even more importantly than that, this judge, initially when this case was brought, this judge was under a lot of pressure, I think, to do everything he could to expedite things for the prosecution and make it easy for them to obtain a conviction. I think that's been flipped on its head now because public opinion has almost reversed on this prosecution, and that gives the judge, I think, a lot more leeway to rule fairly on this stuff.
Well, I hope so, and from your mouth to God's ears, and let's see what happens there in the state of Georgia. Let's turn our attention now further north there on the East Coast and talk a little bit about Alvin Bragg and New York. And what do you think is going to happen with that whole situation?
Oh, gee. I'm not directly involved on this case. I don't have anything that any kind of inside information on that one. I think the case is about equally as absurd. Although some of these New York verdicts we've been getting in these Trump-related lawsuits have just been staggering, especially in the damages they've awarded. So, I'm not barred in New York. I don't know what the issue is with their legal system, but it makes it awfully hard to give a prediction of how this will go.
When you're the AG and you're running for election, well, let me rephrase that. You are running for the AG position in New York. And you are saying, as you're running, I'm going to get Donald Trump.
Well, I believe Fannie Willis did the same thing in Georgia.
Exactly.
It's not. Nothing's happened to her for that yet.
Yeah. And here is Letitia James. She's on tape. She said it many times, over and over again. And then every day she's tweeting out, this is how much you owe President Trump, and if you don't pay it back, we're going to liquidate all of your assets, and we're going to go after the Trump Towers, and we're going to... doesn't the average individual look at that and say, this spiteful woman, this is nothing but spiteful Democrats coming after Trump because they just loathe him. They can't handle him.
You would think the American people would see that, and I think most of them are. The unfortunate reality is this tends to sell with a certain segment of the population.
Isn't that
and
sick?
That, to me, is a very troubling thing. It reminds me in George Orwell's 1984, which I know has become way too common of an analogy nowadays.
I think that's become prophecy, much like the Old Testament. But anyway,
but you remember they had the 2 minutes of hate in that, where they would just rail against, I think it was Emmanuel Goldstein, and they'd show his picture. Everybody would just shout at the TV for 2 minutes straight. I feel like there's a certain segment of our population that really wants us to institute that, and they want Trump to be the guy we're shouting at.
I want to just give a quick 15-second shout-out. That story by Orwell has become eerily prophetic.
Uh-huh.
In a major way. And I cannot believe how much of it has manifested itself in reality in the last 4 or 5 years.
No kidding. Yeah, especially when we have bureaus of misinformation and...
Yeah, it's uncanny. I don't know if you heard about this story. This just broke in Breitbart today, and again, I'm throwing this out there, seeing if it'll stick in Alexander Haberbush's mind, see if he knows about it. But I guess the Arizona Democrats are getting kind of anxious because the Georgia case seems to be kind of slowly falling apart. The Alvin Bragg thing doesn't seem to be sticking. And it looks like Trump is going to be able to take care of the punitive damage of $460 billion over the course of $460 million, excuse me, over the course of the next month. But the Arizona Democrats are starting to want to start their own case against Trump in regards to 2020 and how Trump spoke ill of Arizona and whether or not Arizona was on the up and up when it came to the vote. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not heard about that. I've been pretty involved in Arizona, especially, the recently wrapped up Kari Lake litigation. But I hadn't heard that they were planning criminal charges against the president.
Yeah, actually, John Nolte just wrote this today for Breitbart. It says fascist Arizona Democrats. Obviously, he's got an opinion, right? Fascist Arizona Democrats.
No, that's not an opinion.
Not at all. Accelerate case against Donald Trump as Fani Willis implodes. And the whole point of this is they say it's a sharp acceleration of their criminal investigation into efforts to overturn Joe Biden's alleged victory in the state. And they're trying to somehow come up with another trial against former President Trump because they see the implosion of these other two. And who knows?
Weren't these the guys who were repeating for years straight that the Trump team fought 65 lawsuits and then lost all of them? And that was somehow, proof that the Trump team was wrong. They're going to do the same thing now?
I don't know. Alexander, these guys are literally...
It wasn't a true stat, by the way. That was made up.
I completely believe those folks out there that say that Trump derangement syndrome is a real syndrome.
It has to be.
I mean, I cannot believe... Now, listen, you and I are not that far apart in age, and we probably go back to about, I would say, Carter. But
I'm a little younger than that.
Oh, you're a little... Okay.
Yeah.
God bless you for that, Alexander. But I can't remember in the modern day, other than maybe some of the radical leftists that went after George W. Bush in his second term and the whole Iraq War thing. But I just can't... I don't remember anything quite like this. The derangement is just literally over the top.
Yeah. As a student of history, I think we had something kind of similar with Nixon, though I wasn't alive for that one. But even there, I think that the degree and the vehemence with which the left-wing media and then the political left treat him, I think is pretty unprecedented. I hate to use that term because there's precedent for almost everything in U.S. history, but I don't know that it's been this vehement before.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the last word here in a minute here, Alexander, but what can you speak to in reference to the Eastman case?
Well, the judge effectively, in the disbarment proceedings, effectively asked for an extension on her date to give an opinion in that case. So now we're looking at late March. Likely that opinion is going to be published. Previously, her deadline was understood to be the 5th of March. Now she's got a few more weeks on that. I guess it's taken her a while to... Well, taken her a while. Won't say much more than that. And then as far as Georgia's concerned, I'm optimistic about this disqualification thing, but even if we can't get the prosecutors disqualified, I think all the defendants are pretty strong on the merits of this case.
And what would you say? Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, what is your quick take on what the Supreme Court might decide concerning Trump's immunity?
I think they're likely to decide the president is immune, and that's because the Constitution actually spells out a specific remedy for if the president commits a high crime or misdemeanor, and that's impeachment. The fact that impeachment exists as a judicial proceeding presided over by both houses of Congress, I think directly suggests that criminal proceedings are not a legitimate form of recourse for a sitting president. So, sure, you can try a president for any criminal misconduct they commit when they're not in office, but if they're in office, you got to impeach them.
So if the Supreme Court comes back and says the president does have immunity in reference to the January 20th situation, can you just imagine the sound across the nation of liberal heads exploding simultaneously?
Well, and that was the real strategic misstep of the left, too, is the Supreme Court was doing everything they could to duck any of these politically contentious cases. And then the left comes along in Colorado and says, we're going to invoke Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to disqualify Trump from the ballot. Just something, absolutely insane and absurd. And then they managed to get a Colorado Court of Appeals to uphold it. I mean, basically forcing the court's hand to take this subject they've been avoiding for the past 3 years. And I think now that they've done that, the floodgates are open.
Well, I think you and I know the Democrats are gluttons for punishment, Alexander.
I guess they must be.
Give the listeners a quick brief on what Lex Rex does. I'll give you the last word. You got 30 seconds.
Yeah, so we are a constitutional advocacy organization. We protect your constitutional rights both on the front end by educating the American people in our podcast, articles, and other materials that you can check out on our website, lexrex.org, lexrex.org, and we also defend your rights in court.
Alexander, great to have you back on. We're looking forward to have you back on next month. God bless you in your marriage, and God bless Lex Rex Institute.
Yep, thank you very much, and God bless you too, Jerry.
All right, we'll have our last word here on Politics in the Pulpit in just a minute. All right, we're back here for our final segment here on Politics and the Pulpit. And it is raining here in Southern California. I guess it still wants to linger just a little bit longer before spring finally arrives. If you cannot get enough of Pastor Jerry Cook, I would encourage you to listen to the Faith and Freedom Hour every Sunday here on KHTS at 8 a.m., where you will get a full-blown Bible sermon from the Freedom's Way Baptist Church. If you ever want to visit our church, you can visit freedomswaybaptistchurch.org. We'll be celebrating our 22nd anniversary in Santa Clarita this coming Sunday on March 10th, and would invite all of you out there that are listening to come on out to the services if you're able to. And then also on March 31st, the last Sunday of this month, we will be celebrating the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, and would encourage you to come out to those morning services, 9:15 for adult Sunday school, all ages, by the way, as well as worship services at 10:30 a.m. Encourage you to come out, make plans to worship the risen Savior. Well, this morning when I got up, first thing I did, I made the mistake of going on Drudge Report, and the Drudge Report was wringing its hands over North Carolina choosing a black Republican by the name of Mark Robinson to be nominated as governor. Now, of course, Mark Robinson's going to go against a Democrat, and depending on which sites you read, it seems that North Carolina will lean Democrat when it comes to governors, because obviously a Democrat is currently leaving the office, Roy Cooper, and will probably be replaced by another Democrat. But, however, North Carolina seems to be really turning a corner. It used to be a kind of a swing state, if you will, and it for all purposes it still is a swing state, but it seems to be trending more and more safe Republican, especially with Donald Trump. And so there is a possibility that Mark Robinson could be the first black Republican governor of the state of North Carolina. And Drudge Report, which of course is left of center, and I don't know what happened to Drudge Report. It was very reliable years ago, but in the last 4 or 5 years, it's bat crazy. But they're wringing their hands about a black man as a Republican. And all I can tell you is I believe that the majority of our Democratic friends, I hate to say this, they think we're racist. The problem is I think they're projecting, folks. I think they're projecting because they're racist. They can't handle the fact that a black man or a black woman realizes that the groupthink that they were part in is not good for them, and they have walked away from the Democratic plantation. And they have cut themselves of the chains of the political malfeasance that has happened in the Democratic Party now for over 200 years. And now you've got black people saying, you know what, we might give Trump and the Republican Party a try. Now something north of 23% of black Democrats might actually vote for Trump. That's going to be huge. That is a demographic shift. But MSNBC cannot stand you out there. Yesterday, Jen Psaki and Joy Reid and the other individuals on MSNBC were going on about the folks voting yesterday in the various states, and were beside themselves that people would actually cite the situation with the border as one of the primary problems that is happening in America. I want you to listen to Jen Psaki from MSNBC, aka Peppermint Patty, talking about some of these exit polls from the state of Virginia. Clip 1.
I mean, if you look at some of these exit polls, I mean, I live in Virginia. Immigration was the #1 issue. Yes. I mean, again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very contested area.
Yeah, that last voice you heard there was Rachel Madcow, who a little bit later, when Trump came out to give his victory speech, if you will, which, by the way, if you watched that victory speech last night at Mar-a-Lago, was actually very measured. He seemed very toned down from the Trump that we know, and didn't even mention Nikki Haley's name, not once. That was a general election tone speech, and he is focused now. Trump is focused on Biden. But listen to the cackles of those women on MSNBC who literally loathe you backwoods, Bible-toting, Second Amendment-loving Christians out there and conservatives who still love the good old United States of America. It's those kinds of people that MSNBC looks down their collective noses at that are going to rise up in what Jerry Falwell used to call back in the 80s the silent majority, and Ronald Reagan called the silent majority. And they're not going to be so silent anymore. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, they're going to cheat. Well, I'm not a big fan of Hugh Hewitt, but Hugh Hewitt wrote a book way back in 2004 called If It's Big, They Can't Cheat. And the point of the book is, if the margin is that big, then they really can't cheat. And folks, we got to run up those margins, especially in the states where they count, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And I think there'll be some states that are going to surprise us this year, with Minnesota basically choosing uncommitted, almost 20% of the state against Biden. I'm not saying that Minnesota is going to turn red, because obviously even Ronald Reagan couldn't do that in 1984 against Walter Mondale, but it's possible that Trump could win the popular vote by running up his margins in all of these blue states by trending them from dark blue to light blue. And could it be possible that Trump not only wins the electoral vote by a modern-day landslide margin, but also ends up winning the popular vote? That would irritate the establishment Republicans who have looked down their noses at Trump for the last 10 years. And wouldn't it be great if that guy that they loathe ends up doing what they've always wanted themselves to do? Well, that's it for today with Politics in the Pulpit. We'll catch you next week. Hopefully you'll listen in here on your hometown station.